Hey everybody, welcome to the video. It's Friday, July 23rd. We're breaking down this massive 14-game slate that we have over on DraftKings today. And I'll tell you right now, this slate looks absolutely awesome. We have tons of aces on the mound, good SP2 options, and loads of good offensive pieces as well. And to be honest, this might be one of my most favorite slates on the entire season, so I'm really looking forward to breaking this down for you all. And if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so. It's just a free and easy way to help show your support to the channel. And if you don't follow me over on social media, you know to do so using the handles in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And if you want access to some extra content, my entire spreadsheet that I use each and every single day, which has projections, my own personal optimizer, ownership projections, rankings, cheat sheets, Discord community, all that fun stuff, you can find it down in the link below. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by Prize Picks. I'm sure most of you know what it is by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified. Just you versus the projections. You don't have to worry about sharks, salary cap restrictions, or 150 max contest kind of things. It's just you versus the props that they offer each and every single day, and you can usually find some pretty soft lines on there as well. So if you want to check it out, you can use the link down below, or you can go to prizepicks.com and use the code CPENN and get a free money bonus up to $100. That's an instant deposit match, so if you deposit $100, you get $100 for free, so it's free money. Why not use it to your advantage? And if you do so, make sure you use code CPENN and tell them I sent you. But I think that's it for the plugs for the most part, so without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as per usual, we will start with the pitchers and move on to the bats. And there's tons of good pitching options today. If I don't have your favorite pitcher listed here, there's a good chance I do have some interest in them. I'm just trying to save some time here and only have a short list. But if we just look at the overall pitching data sheet today, so many good pitchers. Gerrit Cole, Freddie Peralta, Zack Wheeler, Lucas Giolito, Tyler Mahle, Tyler McGill, who's been really good in a short stint so far this season, Frankie Montas versus Seattle. I mean, the list goes on. There's tons of good pitchers on this slate. But just for this small group that I have listed here, we'll start up top with Gerrit Cole, $10,000. And he has been on an absolute heater. I know whenever they announced the sticky stuff was going to start getting cracked down on, he kind of went on a skid where all his numbers dipped and everything. But I'm not sure if he found some extra special sticky stuff that no one can find yet on him, but he has found something the past two starts because he has been absolutely excellent. He's had 50 and 35 or 38 DraftKings points the past two starts, which is absolutely amazing. He had that 12 strikeout game with the 50 points versus his old team in Houston, and man, he has been really good. And only $10,000. I say only, but that's pretty good for a guy that's been putting up those kind of numbers recently. I like the recent form that I'm seeing from Gerrit Cole. Now, there is some concerns here. The matchup versus Boston, especially on the road in Fenway, is not a good one. They've been a very good hitting team this season, and plus Fenway Park is definitely more catered towards hitters than it is for pitchers. And over a 4 implied team total against them, not even a favorite, just kind of a pick 'em here. 8K prop though, and his numbers are still excellent on the season. I just do worry about this matchup versus Boston because there's plenty of good bats in this lineup. Kike Hernandez, Rafael Devers, JD Martinez, Xander Bogaerts, Hunter Renfroe. I mean, it's just a pretty good overall lineup. So it's definitely not going to be a cakewalk here for Gerrit Cole, but he definitely has the upside to be good here, and I like this price point. His numbers on the season are still excellent. 34% K rate. That doesn't really walk too many guys. XFIP and Sierra both around 2.8 with an ERA of around 2.6. Does give a little bit of power and some fly balls, but I mean, that's what we kind of expect from Gerrit Cole. It just comes with massive strikeout upside, so we've always kind of not really worried about that too much. Limiting the hard contact to 31%, around a homer per 9. Matchup sucks versus Boston, but at his price point and the upside that he offers you every single time he's on the mound, I definitely think he is worth it. And then dropping as Zack Wheeler here, $9,800. Again, not in love with the matchup here, but he's just a very talented pitcher. And no Ronald Acuna for the Braves definitely waters that lineup down a little bit, so it does help things out for Zack Wheeler. Really low implied team total here at 3.54. I believe it's the current lowest on the entire slate here, although it is close to some other games. But slight favorite here, and his numbers on the season have been absolutely excellent as well. Not quite the strikeouts that Gerrit Cole has, but he's really good at limiting power. Gets a lot of ground balls, doesn't really give up many homers whatsoever. Still sitting at a strikeout rate above 30%. XFIP around 2 3/4. CRA right around 3. Doesn't really walk too many guys. He's got a heater. Typically can go deep into games here. I have no issues with Zack Wheeler whatsoever today. If you want to spend it for Gerrit Cole and Zack Wheeler in the same lineup, I'd have no issue with that. I think pretty much the two best pitching options on this slate, although Lucas Giolito definitely, you can make a case for him as well. But both these guys are going to get out very well projection-wise, and the one thing I love with Zack Wheeler is the guy just does not give up any hard contact whatsoever. Only half a homer allowed per 9 this season and a 22% hard contact rate. Plus the Braves, they will strike out quite a bit versus right-handed pitching, over 25% of the time. And I know the Braves did very well last night and they were chalky, but Matt Moore is a lot different of a pitcher than Zack Wheeler is, so definitely think he's a good play below $10,000. Then dropping out of Lucas Giolito here, kind of ending our run of aces, if that's what you want to call it. $9,600. Really good matchup versus Milwaukee. It's a hitter-friendly park in Milwaukee, though, but still a team total below 4 against him. Is a slight underdog, although this will be a pretty tough pitching matchup. Both sides of this game as Freddie Peralta takes the mound, but I don't love the matchup here versus the White Sox, but I do prefer righties versus them, so if you want to play Freddie Peralta in tournaments, I do have no issue with that. He's got around a 35% K rate this season, just can struggle with walks a little bit, and the White Sox definitely have some good bats in the lineup, but I do think Lucas Giolito is a pretty solid play here, as I do like righties versus Milwaukee because they do strike out quite a bit versus them. They strike out versus lefties quite a bit as well, but versus righties in the season, 88 WRC plus, 301 WOBA, 155 team ISO, and a 25.5% K rate. So at his price point, I do think Lucas Giolito is certainly interesting. Sitting around a 30% K rate this season, 3.5 xFIP in Sierra. Does walk some guys and does give up some power, over a 200 ISO given up this season with a 43% fly ball rate, but I do like the strikeout upside that we have versus Milwaukee here. And like I said, I think Freddie Peralta is a fine play in tournaments as well. And then dropping down to some SP2 options, we have Joe Musgrove and Eduardo Rodriguez. So Musgrove sitting here at $8,400, and this is purely a matchup and park play. Miami's one of the best places to pitch. Miami overall is just not a very good team versus right-handed pitching this season. Some pretty pedestrian numbers overall. Now they're striking out more versus lefties than they are versus righties, but the power has been non-existent versus right-handed pitching. Only a 134 team ISO, 90 WRC plus, well below 300, and a 25.5% K rate. Plus, it's a fantastic pitcher's park in Miami as well. And Musgrove's numbers on the season have been pretty solid. Now, I will say recently he's kind of struggled quite a bit. Early in the season, he was pretty much a lockdown, really good pitcher. He's definitely faded away a little bit, but still a 28% K rate in the season, 3.5 xFIP. Batting average below 200 allowed, only a 147 ISO, so I think he's going to be just fine in a soft matchup versus Miami at this price point. Then Eduardo Rodriguez, $8,300. I think he's kind of the tournament pivot off of Musgrove because I do think Musgrove will pick up some ownership just because of the matchup in the park that he's in. And Eduardo Rodriguez, I don't think people love using pitchers versus New York, even though their offense looks pretty horrible right now. Like, whenever you see the lineup get rolled out for New York, it's like, my gosh, who are like half of these people in the lineup? They even have Brett Garner close to leading off some days, and it's a hitter-friendly park in Boston. I don't like that, but Rodriguez has been an interesting case this season because if you look at his ERA, it's sitting around 5.2, which looks absolutely horrible, but his xFIP's around 2 runs lower at 3.34, and the Sierra's around 3.5, boasting around a 28% K rate. Has given up a little bit of pop this season, but he limits the hard contact at 27%, and like I was mentioning, this Yankees lineup is really bad right now. Like, yeah, maybe a guy like Giancarlo Stanton could take him deep, but I'm not really too concerned here. I think he should be just fine at $8,300. I do think he's a pretty solid play in tournaments because I don't think a lot of people are going to go there just because people do not like using pitchers versus the Yankees. And with that being said, I think that'll be pretty much it for the pitching. But I do want to mention one thing here. So if you're loading up on bats today and you need a cheap pitcher, I think there's a somewhat viable YOLO play here in Kris Bubic, who is currently the cheapest projected starting pitcher on this slate today. So if we scroll all the way down, I did not feel comfortable enough putting him on the main sheet here to talk about for you guys on the YouTube here, but $5,000, good matchup here versus Detroit. He is a favorite, slight favorite here. 4.76 implied team total against him, which I don't love, and he's not a good pitcher. I'm not saying that he is. I mean, it's mainly just a matchup play here, and he did score 18 points in his last start. I don't hate him. I don't think he's going to have a great game, but if you need to load up on expensive bats, you need a cheap pitcher to make things work, I think Kris Bubic might make some sense here. Detroit this season has been horrendous versus left-handed pitching. Now, it's gotten better. Earlier in the season, it was absolutely terrible. I think at one point, the WRC plus was like in the 30s. The stuff has gotten better, and there's a couple of guys in the lineup that can hit lefties well, like Jonathan Scope. Miguel Cabrera's okay, Candelario, but overall, I'm not overly concerned about anybody in that lineup. Now, I'm not saying you can't stack Detroit today. I actually think they're somewhat of a decent stack, but if you need a cheap pitcher that might not get blown up and score like 10 to 12 points here, Kris Bubic could do it. They have a 28.5% K rate, 146 team ISO lefties, and only 87 WRC plus. It's scary. It's a YOLO play, but if you need a cheap pitcher, I think it could end up working today. But I think that'll pretty much be it for the pitchers, so we'll move right over to the bat. I'll tell you right now, there's quite a few good offenses to talk about today. But we'll start up top with the catcher position. We have Salvador Perez, $5,300. Very expensive, but I do like the Royals today versus Willie Peralta. I know his numbers on the season, if you're just looking at the surface, they've looked pretty good this year, but regression is going to hit this guy at some point. And yeah, I've been wrong, I feel like almost every single time because he just keeps having good games here. But if you're looking at his ERA, it's below 2. It's around 1.5 at 1.64, but the xFIP, it's about 3 runs higher at 4.5. The Sierra is close to 5. He only has a 15% K rate, close to a 9% walk rate, 5.5 Ks per 9, over a 160 ISO given up. Does get ground balls, but a 35% hard contact rate. At some point, he's going to get beat up a little bit. I would not be surprised if it comes here. The Royals offense is not my favorite offense in the world, but they still have a team total above 5 here. So Vegas agrees. They think Willie Peralta is going to get shaken up a little bit at some point here. And Salvador Perez is one of the best hitting catchers in baseball, batting around 275 with over a 220 ISO, which is very good numbers for a catcher. It's in a prime spot in the order, so if you got the money for Perez, I think he's a fantastic play, but probably reserved better for tournaments. Max Stassi, $4,600. Anytime Jay Happ's on the mound, I always like to use opposing right-handed bats versus him. That's the case here. I do think the Angels stack does look pretty good, and their offense is pretty bad, so whenever they have a team total above 5, that's how you know a pretty bad pitcher's on the mound. And Stassi has been one of the better hitting catchers in baseball this year. It's not as big of a sample size as some of the other guys, but batting around 300 with a 380 WOBA, 200 ISO, 143 WRC plus, and close to a 400 PP. I think he makes for a really fine play in tournaments, or if you're just stacking up the Angels, or you can play him in cash games as well if you have the money for him. But if you are spending it for a pitcher today, you probably have to go a little bit cheaper at catcher. And then Tyler Stevenson, $4,100. And I was looking around and I saw a lot of spots that had Tucker Barnhart projected to start, but since that would be a lefty-on-lefty matchup, I'm assuming Tyler Stevenson is going to be the one ending up starting here because he has been pretty good versus lefties this year, and he typically does play when there is a lefty on the mound, so I guess we'll have to wait and see on that. But assuming he is in, he has shown plenty of upside versus left-handed pitching this season, and I'm loving the Reds here quite a bit. They get a good matchup versus lefty and Wade LeBlanc, soft-tossing lefty, one of the best places to hit in baseball at home in Great American Small Park. I mean, in the summertime when it's hot and muggy in Cincinnati, this park usually produces a lot of runs, and I would say Cincinnati, Camden Yards, Coors Field, pretty much one of the best places to hit in all of baseball. They have a team total around 5.5, and the Cardinals bullpen, if they can get the Wade LeBlanc early on, the Cardinals bullpen is one of the worst in the entire league. If we look at their bullpen xFIP this season, I mean, it's awful. It's right around 5 at 4.97, and if they can get Wade LeBlanc out early on, which I think they're certainly capable of doing so, it could get even better for them. So I'm loving all the Reds here quite a bit. The righties make sense in cash games, but you can play the lefties in tournaments if you're just full on stacking them. And then dropping in at first base, we have Josh Bell, $4,000. And telling you right now, I love the Angels, I love the Reds, and I like the Nationals, so I'm a big fan of all the red-colored teams today. But the Nationals here draw a pretty good matchup versus Jorge Lopez, pretty average pitcher at best, and I'd say most times below average. And as of right now, they have a team total right around 5. I think that seems a little bit too low. I am recording this video at 12 a.m., so the numbers when I wake up, they do change quite a bit, so don't be surprised if you see the Nationals closer to 5.5, but they're on the road. Camden Yards, like kind of right up there with Cincinnati in the summertime, where it's one of the best places to hit in all of baseball outside of Coors Field, and you get the guarantee Anthony bats on the road as well. And Baltimore's bullpen's not that great either, so I think the Nationals are in an excellent spot. Josh Bell has been playing well recently, has over a 200 ISO this season, despite having a pretty low batting average. I do like the power upside here quite a bit. And batting cleanup, there's plenty of opportunity here for Josh Bell to have a pretty solid game for fantasy purposes. And then on the opposite side of this game, we have Ryan Mountcastle here. And I think this game could definitely pop off quite a bit. I think that 4.5 implied team total is just a little bit too low here for the Orioles because Patrick Corbin, yes, he can be a very hit or miss pitcher, but I don't have any trust or confidence in Patrick Corbin having a good game here. And Baltimore has actually been a sneaky good team versus left-handed pitching this season because if we actually, let's go over to the pitcher data sheet here and pull up the Orioles splits versus lefties this year. They've kind of struggled versus righties, but versus lefties, they've actually been one of the better teams versus them this season. So Patrick Corbin here, so I'll try to highlight the numbers we're looking at. So versus left-handed pitching, they have a 112 WRC plus, 334 WOBA, 329 OBP, around a 170 ISO, 7.6% walk rate, and only striking out 21.7% of the time. So I realize this is not the most exciting offense out there, but they've got quite a few guys that can hit left-handed pitching pretty well. I don't have Trey Mancini listed on here just because of the price point, but I think you can play him too. He's just pretty expensive, around $5,000. That's why I put Mountcastle on here because he bats cleanup and he's a lot cheaper. But we know there's plenty of pop, especially versus left-handed pitching, so I think he makes sense if you want to get contrarian because I don't think a lot of people are going to play the Orioles, but I think you can always stack against Patrick Corbin. Then Ryan Zimmerman, $2,400. Since the Nationals are on the road in an AL park, we should get Ryan Zimmerman here for a DH role, and he's only $2,400. Should hit in a decent spot in the order. I prefer him versus lefty. I just like the Nationals quite a bit overall today, and he's got a 222 ISO, which is pretty good for a guy that is dirt cheap. So like him if you're stacking up the Nationals, but I definitely prefer getting the Josh Bell in cash games. Dropping out of second base here, we have Jonathan India, 4,500 bucks, just another righty here versus Wade LeBlanc. And I've already mentioned the reasons I like all the Reds here, so nothing too special for Jonathan India. He's got a little bit of pop in his bat, but he's been good at making contact, getting on base around a 400 OBP this season with over a 120 WRC plus. I think he's a fine option for cash games. Same goes for David Fletcher, $4,500. If I had to pick between the two, I am going to prefer India just because a little bit more power upside. I do like the Reds more than I like the Angels. Definitely a more hitter-friendly park in Cincinnati, but liking all the Angels here quite a bit. I mean, specifically the righties, but you can play a guy like Ohtani as well. But J. Happ, not a good pitcher. He's shown that multiple times this season. And Fletcher, he's a guy that barely strikes out whatsoever, makes a ton of contact. So he's going to put the ball in play. Just a matter of it, gets to the defense or not. Then Alcides Escobar, 3,200 bucks, a dirt cheap option here for the Nationals. I could see him being quite popular at that price point, especially if he is leading off here versus Jorge Lopez on the road. You get the guarantee nothing at bats. I'd say at the very least he should get 5 at bats in this game, and he's dirt cheap. He's been pretty solid ever since joining the team, so I don't mind that price tag whatsoever. I think he makes a ton of sense in cash games. And then dropping out of third base, we have Eugenio Suarez, 4,300 bucks. Since Nick Castellanos is not going to be in the lineup, I think he should get a bump up in the order, especially versus a lefty. Now Tyler Stevenson, we've seen him bat pretty in the order around third, so maybe they get switched where Suarez hits lower in the order. But we'll see how it goes. But I still think Suarez is a good power option here versus Wade LeBlanc. And that's the only thing Suarez does well, because the guy is completely hit or miss. He'll strike out, feels like half the time. He hits for an extremely low batting average, below 200 this season. I think it's right around 170. I can pull up the actual number here. So yeah, he's batting 175 this season with a really good 197 ISO, but a 68 WRC plus, and the strikeout rate is sitting at nearly 30%. So it's going to be kind of homer or bust for Eugenio Suarez, but do like the upside here versus a pretty pedestrian lefty Wade LeBlanc, plus a pretty bad bullpen as well. Then Hunter Dozier, 3,100 bucks. He's the first row we've talked about since Salvador Perez, and there's a couple of other guys you could look at: Whit Merrifield, Andrew Benintendi, Jorge Soler, and Ryan O'Hearn, a couple of other options. But I think Hunter Dozier at that price point, he's always had some decent pop versus right-handed pitching. He's kind of like Suarez, where he's got a terrible batting average, 174, but decent pop, 170 batting average. Everything else is really, really bad. But at 3,100 bucks, regression will come at some point here for Willie Peralta. It could come in the spot here. Team total above 5. Detroit's bullpen, not as terrible as it once was, but it's still not that great either. And I think Hunter Dozier, decent spot in the order for his price point, batting 5th. I think he's a fine option. Then Josh Harrison, 2,600 bucks. I could see him being popular in cash games. I feel like if you're not playing Suarez in cash, you just get down to Josh Harrison, try to get exposure to that Washington Nationals team, because I am just a big fan of it today. I prefer him versus lefties, but I think he'll be just fine at that price point. Then dropping out of shortstop, we have his teammate Trey Turner here, who I feel like is one of the best plays in the entire slate. Like, if money's not an issue for you, and you can afford Trey Turner and Juan Soto, I absolutely love trying to jam those guys in today. Like, if you have to spend down on any other position to afford guys like Trey Turner and Juan Soto, I would try my very best to do so, because I think they're in a fantastic spot here. Trey Turner's been playing some pretty good baseball recently. He hits for a high batting average. He has power. He has plenty of speed. I mean, I love him today. I mean, he's pretty much the top option here, 5,700 bucks. He could be above $6,000. I'd still have interest here, but I mean, I'm loving Trey Turner quite a bit. If you can make him work, definitely one of the top options on the entire slate for obvious reasons. And dropping down to the only Astro we're going to talk about, we have Carlos Correa at 4,700 bucks, and I actually thinking they're a pretty good pivot off the chalk today, because the Nationals are going to be very chalky. The Reds are going to be. I think the Los Angeles Angels are going to pick up some ownership as well. So I think the Astros are going to get pretty overlooked today, and they have a pretty high implied team total set around 5.4 versus Kobe Allard, who's not a very good pitcher. And there's plenty of good bats in this lineup. It's just a lot of these guys are lefties that I like to use usually, like Kyle Tucker, Michael Brantley, Yordan Alvarez, so people are going to shy away from that lefty-on-lefty matchup, but I'm not overly concerned about it. So if you want to try to get a good stack at around a third of the ownership of some of the other teams, I think the Astros do make some sense here. And Carlos Correa overall has been having a pretty good season. He has been cold for a little bit, but at 4,700 bucks versus a lefty, I think he's a fine tournament pivot off the chalk here. And then we have Kyle Farmer, 3,300 bucks. It's a dirt cheap Cincinnati righty versus Wade LeBlanc. His numbers have been pretty awful this season, kind of battling through a little bit of injuries. But, I mean, if you're just looking for a dirt cheap option here, I think there's a little bit of homer upside versus LeBlanc. Then dropping down to the outfield, I don't love Shohei Ohtani at that price point. I mean, it's massive, $6,500. It might be the most expensive bet I remember seeing all season long. But I kind of put him on here as a reminder that you don't have to fade him because it's a lefty-on-lefty matchup, because he just has just about as much power versus lefties than he's had versus righties this year. So if you are stacking the Angels, I realize it's a massive price point, but I'd probably try to find a way to fit him in if you are doing full-on Angel stack here. I mean, I think you guys get the idea that Shohei Ohtani is pretty good at baseball. He does strike out quite a bit, but over 1,000 OPS, 700 slugging, 180 WRC plus, and a massive 419 ISO. And it's pretty even splits from lefties versus righties, so it doesn't really drop off too much. I mean, it's the same every slate, but he's always going to be one of the top home run calls. Juan Soto, $5,600. If you're playing cash games, I definitely prefer saving $1,000 with Juan Soto than spending it for Shohei Ohtani. I think in cash games, if you're not playing Juan Soto, you're probably doing it wrong tonight. He's the top overall option for me. I would say Juan Soto is my 1A and Trey Turner is my 1B, but if I had to pick between the two, like if you can only spend up for one of those guys, I'm going to prefer Juan Soto. He's been playing really good recently. It's a lefty and righty matchup here versus Jorge Lopez. And I've already mentioned the other reasons why I like the Nationals quite a bit, but Juan Soto grades out very, very well for me. And if I can find a good picture of him, I'll make him the thumbnail of this video. Then Jesse Winker, $4,600. It's a lefty and lefty matchup here, so people will probably shy away, but that just makes me like him more in tournaments. I obviously prefer him versus righties. The splits are much better versus them, but if you are full stack in the Reds, you're probably assuming that Wade LeBlanc gets knocked out of the game early on, and that Cardinals bullpen is absolutely terrible. So we'll see a righty at some point. So I think Jesse Winker is still a fine play, even though he's a little bit more expensive than he was the past few games versus the New York Mets. Then Justin Upton, $3,300. It's a really cheap righty here versus J.A. Happ, and he's shown plenty of power upside this season. 233 ISO with a 351 WOBA and a 480 slugging. I love that price point. Good spot in the order as well. Then a couple of cheap Baltimore Orioles outfielders here in Austin Hayes and Anthony Santander. I was mentioning it with Ryan Mountcastle, but I do think the Baltimore Orioles are in a really good spot here. They're also playing at home in the great hitting park of Baltimore and Camden Yards. They don't get the guaranteed nothing at bats, but I'm assuming they're going to be down in this game, so they'll get those ninth inning at bats anyway. And Patrick Corbin, the Washington Nationals bullpen is not very good, so I think these guys are in a pretty good spot. They shouldn't get too much ownership, but they're at really good price points, and both these guys have a little bit of pop versus left-handed pitching. Then Aquino here, $2,700. I could see him being quite popular because he's just a way to get really cheap exposure to the Cincinnati Reds offense. He's dirt cheap. He has some power versus left-handed pitching. It's a very small sample size this season, but he has a 364 ISO with a 386 WOBA and a 591 slugging, and I love that price point quite a bit. But with that being said, I think that'll be pretty much it for the video, so I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet done so. If you want to follow me over on social media, you can do so using the handles in the bottom hand corner of your screen. And if you want access into my entire spreadsheet with projections, my own optimizer, ownership projections, you can build 150 lineups, do stacks, all that good stuff. Have a Discord community and a cheat sheet which simplifies everything in a top stack tool. You can find that down in the link down below. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by Prize Picks. It's daily fantasy sports simplified, just you versus the projection. And if you want a free money bonus up to $100, that's an instant deposit match up to $100. You can use code CPEN over at prizepicks.com, or you can click the link down below. But it's free money, so why not use it to your advantage? But I think that's just about it. I will stop rambling, and I'll see you guys in the next video on Saturday.